Alrighty, we're going to get going. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Patrick Wilson. I serve as the president of the Pacific Northwest Association for College Admission Counseling. This is the Let's Talk 2020 High School Visits in Coronatimes. So the first half of this meeting is going to be a recorded webinar, and then we're going to move into the second half in small group discussions. You'll want to keep that email that came out about an hour ago or so handy, as that's going to include the link. We had an overwhelming turnout for this, so did a bit of readjusting this morning to ensure that everyone had an opportunity to be in the discussion. Before we get started, I just wanted to send a few PNACAC updates. First, membership application for new and renewing members is now available for the 2020-2021 membership year. Make the most of your membership by joining or rejoining PNACAC now. Beginning this year, we are offering membership to public schools in the PNACAC region for free. So if you are in a public school, your membership is at no cost. Membership is organization-based, and we encourage institutions to add all staff members who would benefit from PNACAC membership. One of those benefits will be webinars throughout the year. We're planning on monthly webinars. These will be free for members, so keep an eye on your email on the website for those programs as they are announced. If you are a member of the National Association for College Admission Counseling, NACAC, you have seen the national conference has moved to a virtual platform, and NACAC and PNACAC will be providing scholarships to attend that program to our members. Virtual fairs, due to the continuing COVID pandemic, we have canceled our in-person college fairs, so making this conversation even more relevant. However, we will be launching virtual fairs for the region, and registration will open on August 15th. We will be offering 3 weeks of programming. Oregon College Week will be from October 5th to the 9th. Washington College Week will be from October 19th to the 23rd. Alaska and Idaho College Week will be October 26th to 30th. And we are working with our friends at the Montana Post-Secondary Opportunities Council, MOPSOC, for their programs that they'll be offering throughout this fall, thus Montana's College Week missing. The virtual fair site will be accessible for students and their parents from September 15th until December 31st, and we hope these virtual fairs will help counselors and their students connect with the colleges and universities throughout the region and beyond. Those details are being finalized and will be available soon. Finally, PNACAC is both a member and volunteer organization, and if you wish to get involved with advocacy, serving on a committee, or even on our executive board, check out the Get Involved link on the website. With that, we'll have a couple quick introductions. We'll move on to the virtual visit pilot project, lessons learned and best practices, and then, as I said, break out into small group discussions, and we'll have some more details about that at the end. But for now, here's Anna and Adrienne.
Thanks, Patrick. Hi, everyone. My name is Adrienne Enriquez, and I work with Oregon Gear Up, which is a federally funded college access program serving schools throughout the state of Oregon, primarily in rural communities. And I am a program manager for that and have been for about 9 years. Before my time with Gear Up, I spent almost a decade in college admissions, both at Lewis and Clark and Grinnell College in Iowa.
Hey everyone, I'm Anna Egeter at the University of Redlands. I'm the Senior Associate Director of Admissions, and I'm regionally based in the Southwest Washington region. And I've been a PNACAC member, I think, for probably at least 15 of my 24 years in college admissions, as well as I've been on the high school side as well. I've worked primarily at small liberal arts and sciences universities throughout the West, as well as a number of places in the Midwest as well. And we wanted to put our self-deprecating photos up here because this is what we're going to look like, I think, for the foreseeable future. We thought about putting in our very professional looking photos that are on all of our websites, and instead we thought we'd remind everybody that this is who we are, this is where we're at, and we're going to embrace it. So why are we here? Well, besides the fact that so many of you wanted to hear about virtual visits today. This came up because Adrienne and I, 2 years ago, and she'll talk about it a bit more in a second, piloted, or actually Adrienne piloted and I came along for the ride, some virtual visits, and very specifically working with rural students in Oregon. And we learned a lot, and I had a great experience as a part of that and learned some new things. And admittedly, when I did, I thought, you know, this would be really great opportunity to just expand. I also myself come from a small town, grew up in a small town, went to a small town high school, and I now live rurally. And so how can I reach out to students in different areas was really top of mind. And so I came along for the ride with Adrienne, and we learned a lot. And as we, though, then afterwards, as we debriefed and thought about things, we should really share this. So we put forth a couple of different proposals in the spring of 2019. 2 of the 3 were denied. I bet those places wish that they hadn't. But we did present at WACAC. I'm also a member of WACAC because Redlands is in California, and they do a one-day workshops called Share, Learn, and Connect. We actually presented virtually because Adrienne and I are both up in the Pacific Northwest, and it was a California event. I think we had 3, maybe 4 people attend, so probably was not also top of mind for folks. And then I'm gonna out a couple of people, but Super ICAC turned us down, as did NCAN, which is the largest college access program in the country. And they also have a regional or a national convention, but things have changed. And so here's the positive of Corona. We have all talked about in college admissions and in CBOs and even on the high school side of things of how can we do different things differently? How can we reach out to students and in different ways? And so while we can see this as a challenge, I see it not as a negative challenge, but a challenge in terms of taking up a new step and going in a new direction. And so here we are. So this spring I said, Adrienne, we might want to dust off what we're talking about. And yes, things are very different in terms of the focus of this pilot program and where we are now, but I think there's some really great lessons to be learned. And then on the back half of this, as Adrienne and I were talking, realized we really wanted everybody to be able to talk. Every time Adrienne and I have talked about this conversation, I've learned something new. I thought up something this morning as we were redesigning it. And so we're hoping that all of you will walk away with some new ideas, or if nothing else, you're inspired to take up that charge. So Adrienne.
Sure. So thank you, Anna. We wanted to start by just giving you a sense of what that pilot project looked like when we first started thinking about virtual visits. And so I want to give you a sense of what we did, what the results of that were, and then we'll go into some of those key lessons before we have the time to talk together. And the first thing I want to do is just share with you a really quick video. This is how we, for lack of a better word, advertise the opportunity to colleges to join us in this project of meeting students where they were at in their high schools in far-flung rural Oregon. And so hopefully, Anna, if you can press play, we'll see what happens. Sounds like the music isn't happening, but just imagine some music in the background here. I think it's fine to just play it without the music. That's one of our key takeaways. Technology doesn't always work the way we think it does. Okay, so again, just as a quick reminder, Oregon Gear Up is a federally funded college access program that serves schools predominantly in rural Oregon communities. And we piloted these virtual admissions visits 2 years ago for a few reasons. The primary one being that we had done some surveying of our high schools and learned that on average, fewer than 5 college representatives were visiting them and their students each year. And we understood why. We understood that there were budget and time restrictions on travel, that smaller schools have fewer students and colleges need to use their budgets efficiently. But we really wanted to make sure that students had the opportunities that their peers in larger communities had to meet with college admission staff. We thought that was a really valuable experience. And so I did a little bit of research to see what were folks doing about, were virtual visits happening around the country, and I actually couldn't find any on any sort of large scale of virtual happenings. And so I set out to just figure out what would that look like on a smaller scale in Oregon. And so we piloted the project. We said, we invited colleges using that video, both in Oregon and out of Oregon, to join us. And we asked admissions representatives to meet with groups of students during the school day virtually. We wanted it to be similar to what an in-person recruitment visit would look like, recognizing that many of our high schools, again, they were seeing on average fewer than 5 college representatives. So this was a new thing for them, to have college admissions folks come in for these recruitment visits. And then of course the virtual aspect was new for everybody since it wasn't happening on a large scale. But we wanted it to be as similar to those in-person recruitment visits, to have those same sorts of benefits to come out of that. We asked colleges to send recruitment literature to schools 2 weeks ahead of the visit so that students would get the same kinds of literature that you might take or that they might receive when folks were visiting. And then we set things up. We scheduled visits for schools, and well, here's what ended up happening. We had 15 high schools participate, and our high schools were very insistent that they wanted it to be more than just their 12th graders, that they wanted this to be something that was available for all of their students, 9th through 12th grade. And our college participants agreed that that was okay, even though that maybe is a little bit different from what you're used to in terms of entering into a school building for a recruitment visit. Some schools had small groups of students, anywhere from 1 to 10. Some had full class visits, and so they were meeting with the English class, for example. So 15 high schools, 9th through 12th grade, a variety of different types of visits. 23 colleges took us up on the offer. We probably offered or invited 3 or 4 times that many to join us, and 23 colleges did. Almost half of them were from out of state. Almost half of them were public institutions. We had no community colleges who took us up on this offer, though we did give that offer to them. So that's who joined us. And we learned a lot of things. I think the most important thing that we learned is that when they work really, really well. So when there's an opportunity for students to meet with college folks, whether that's in person or virtually, it is a positive thing. We learned that for students, especially if they didn't have the opportunity to meet college representatives in person, this was just as useful and beneficial to them. So we learned some key lessons about how to ensure that they work. So we built some best practices out of this. Looks like the animation on this isn't particularly great. So technology. So these are the 5 best practices that we're going to talk more in depth about. The first one is making sure that as you're working on these, you're scheduling appropriately, that you're communicating clearly, so the high school and college side, that we're using technology effectively, but also being flexible with that. So we'll get more into that. That we really think about these as normal visits, and that we're all on all sides of the desk realistic about what we can accomplish when visiting virtually. So we're going to talk about each of those best practices now a little bit more in depth. And this first one around scheduling appropriately, this is really about thinking around a few things, including timing. And the first thing I want to say is these are the best practices that we developed after this pilot project, which was designed specifically for, again, reaching rural communities. Anna and I have spent quite a bit of time talking about how many of these best practices may or may not translate into the virtual visits of Coronatimes. We think a lot of them do, but we also recognize that there may be some things that are a little bit different. And that's actually what we're going to ask you to be thinking about and talking about in the small group discussions. And so as we share these best practices, we just want to acknowledge that these are the things that we learned, and we know that some may be more or less applicable. Around timing in particular, we recognize that timing might need to be altered this year, and really want people to think about things like, are teachers going to be willing to let students out of class? If classes are happening in session or in person, are teachers going to be willing to let them out of class? Are students going to be in two different locations? Will some students be at home and some at school at the same time on any given day when your schedule, when a college visit is happening? Is it better to do a before or after school visit or a lunch visit? So really thinking about timing with respect to what works for the high school and for students is one of the big lessons that we think is definitely applicable to the coming year.
When you talk about collaboration, I want to actually give a shout out to the Corvallis School District, and they actually have already announced that they're collaborating. And this is one thing that from the high school side they can think about, is that Corvallis and Crescent Valley, the two public high schools in the area, just announced straight out and said, we're doing our visits together. Now, one of the reasons why that worked is that they have the same bell schedule, and gave very explicit and detailed, like, you go and sign up. I think you sign up with Corvallis, but Crescent Valley will also join. They're on rep visits. So from the high school side, is there a high school that you could collaborate with? And maybe it's not your fellow public school. And even in terms of timing, I will throw out, could you do something in the evenings or the afternoons that might also allow for that collaboration? From the college side, could you collaborate with another university and do something together? Or could you also collaborate or kind of create a collaboration and maybe do the entire school district? So, maybe I reach out to all of the Bellingham high schools and say, can I do them all at once? Because admittedly, I see maybe two students in a normal situation. Could I, use my time appropriately and be realistic and go forth? And then flexibility, realizing that we're going to have to think about, and from a college perspective, really think about those students and their schedules. I saw there was a Q&A question that popped up in terms of, do we really think that a full class might be in a session? And that could happen actually in some places that are smaller and they're a small high school and they figured it out. But it also could be maybe there's two students in a college counseling center and then 3 students that are all logging in from home, and that flexibility of what that might look like. I do think we will see less of that. When I was doing my visits, and that was another question of kind of what was the end result. I had a classroom of students and it was a wide mix of who we saw. I don't see that happening quite as often, just because of the nature of things. But I would say if you are a high school or if you're working with a high school that can do that, it is absolutely a possibility. And then proactive outreach. I think Adrienne and I come at this from 2 very different angles, and I think there's a different angle for a high school versus a college. But from the college side of things, when I was scheduling my visits with Adrienne's project, I kind of gave myself a goal of, I think I could do 6, out of that 15. And so looking at those 15 schools wasn't very difficult to do. I spent an hour. I had a student that was a current student from one of those 15 high schools. Well, that was an easy one to add in. I had an applicant. Admittedly, because this was a pilot program of rural high schools, I knew I was going to run out of those options pretty quickly. But then I went through and looked at my inquiries and prospects and found a couple of other schools that had raised their hand and said, I'm willing to participate, I'm interested in this. And then me as a college counselor or college admissions folks said, okay, I'm willing to engage. So I did a session for 10th grade AVID class and on just general things. And I call that alternative outreach, but it's really important to do. So I challenge the colleges to think about those high schools that maybe are underserved, but might need an institutional strategic plan, or those high schools that have, you've always wanted to visit, but you can't visit Montana every year. And so where can you go because you're sitting in your home? Reach out to 5 additional ones. Don't do 50. And I think you should have a reason for reaching out to those additional schools. I think that's an important piece of things. And offer up a general session. It doesn't have to be just about the University of Redlands. It could be about going to college in California, for example, or what does small liberal arts and sciences mean? But that proactive outreach, I think, is important. And then there's also the proactive outreach that a high school can do as well that Adrian can mention. So.
Yeah, I think that for high schools, it's going to be potentially a really great opportunity to reach colleges that you might not otherwise have coming to visit your students, and to be thoughtful about getting a variety of those schools so that you are having the opportunity to introduce your students to a wider variety of colleges than you may already have coming out to visit, and being thoughtful about that. And making the invitation, I think, is a good thing to do. And there's some really good opportunities here to think more broadly than we may have in the past. And admittedly, I looked through the list of attendees for this particular webinar, and in some ways we might be preaching a little bit to the choir around this, but really want to still mention that this is a really good opportunity to think about colleges who you might not regularly think about. There are a number of different online platforms and where this scheduling can happen. And so from the high school side, my best recommendation would be to choose one and use that one. And make sure that you're reaching out to the colleges that you're interested in having come visit your students virtually, and let them know. I mean, so this is the same as what it normally would be anyway, that you're letting them know this is how you sign up for our visit. But choose one, stick with that one if at all possible. And on the college side, just with the hope of speaking for schools that we largely work with, many of whom, again, don't have a lot of experience with visits and don't always know that they can ask you. So I'm speaking directly to the colleges. Some of the schools we work with, they just don't know that they can ask you for this. And so what I would ask of you is we'll work with our schools to remind them, to encourage them, to empower them to ask you for that. But I also would love to ask college folks if you can take the time, if you can find the time in your schedule to do a little bit of extra research, and as you're going into rep visits, for example, doing a search, and I know it's not super easy, but doing a search for Oregon schools and seeing if there's an Oregon school that hasn't reached out to you that you might be interested in visiting, and signing up for a visit with them, even if they haven't reached out to you, because again, they don't always know, depending on how often they have visitors coming to visit them, that they can do that. So
communicate clearly. Seems kind of like a no-brainer. Like, of course I'm going to communicate. There's a whole extra layer of communication that I will admit I can't even wrap my brain around, but things to think about. I think we're talking today about virtual visits because we know they're a foregone conclusion, but I don't want to eliminate the fact that there may be some high schools that are able to do in person, and there's also some colleges that are willing to do so as well. I think perhaps more importantly, and this was a question on the Q&A too, is like, well, what happens if we're doing a hybrid model and half my students are at home and half of them are at school? And I'll admit, I don't know. But know that colleges, regardless of what the session is or what what platform we're using, in person or virtual, we will reach out to our students in terms of saying, hey, I'm quote unquote visiting your high school today at 2 o'clock and log in here. And so I think making sure that you know where the platform is, who's hosting it. Is it the high school? Is it the college? I think most colleges have a platform that we are using, Zoom and WebEx being, I think, the most popular, but also a high school might want to host it. So we need to really be aware of those different things. And I also want to throw out that here's an opportunity for us to do kind of the usual visit, or again, as we did in a virtual visit world, did some more workshop sort of opportunities. And that may be, again, a great way to do some more additional outreach, those areas that we're not doing. And then lastly, though I know Adrian has things about each of these topics to talk about as well, don't forget your time zones. And we have 2 time zones in the state of Oregon, not just within PNACAC. There is a section of Oregon that is in Mountain Time Zone. I also know from the registrant list that there are some folks here today that are not on the West Coast that are logging in. And if you are switching time zones, either you are from the West looking at the East as your territory, or if those East Coasters that are, or Midwesterners that are on this call today and are looking at the Northwest, make sure you understand those time zones. And I'll even say figuring out how it's going to look on your CRM is a really important thing. So nothing we're going to solve today in the next few minutes, but time zones, you have to think about them and make sure if you're talking to a school outside of your time zone that you're both agreeing on the same time zone. And what does 9 o'clock mean? It likely is going to need to be in that high school perspective. So that's what you have to keep in mind. So Adrian?
I don't think that I have anything else to add to that. I know that there was a question about, so there's a question about high schools that might not have access to broadband internet. Honestly, that is a challenge that came up when we did our pilot as well. The question specifically references Alaska, but that was true in parts of remote rural Oregon. And I think our best bet, I know Anna, you had one that was a phone call, right?
I did one where I was on video and I was on a phone call. I was on the phone, and actually the high school had the student that had to ask the question sit in the chair. They kept the chair rotated. I couldn't actually see the student because they were right off screen. I had another one where the way that the computer was and the video screen was, I actually could watch myself the entire video, the entire presentation, which was awkward. And I also knew that I was frozen for about 50% of that presentation as well, which was even doubly awkward. And you just got to go with it. So,
yeah, so I think this is a really good lead into the next best practice, which is to use technology effectively, and really just being aware that sometimes things aren't going to be as high tech as we might want them to be. And to be prepared for that, to be flexible with that. And so, you know, just always being, and I think that folks are getting a lot better at this now. I mean, I do think that one of the things that is different now than it was 2 years ago when we did this, my guess is that high schools are going to be a lot more prepared, and students are going to be a lot more prepared for these kinds of virtual opportunities than they might have been 2 years ago, because they've had a lot more practice in the last 5 months. But the reality is that there are still going to be some challenges. And so we just need to be aware for that. And so folks should be prepared to be as low tech as possible. If that means getting on the phone and having a speakerphone and a video that is a little bit wonky, I think that that's okay. Something is oftentimes better than nothing, particularly when we all sort of are in a position of understanding that that's how things are going now. Also, just being prepared. I know students like videos, they like pictures, but they don't like long videos. That 1 minute video that we shared is probably about the max that you can get from a room full of students in this kind of environment. They like videos, they like photos, they like seeing your face, they want to know who they're talking to, but also being aware that sometimes that's just not going to be possible. And so being prepared to do those things when it's possible, and also being prepared to be flexible if it's not. And so that's incumbent on really everybody. And I think it's incumbent on high schools to help prepare students for the possibility that things might go awry.
And related to that, I would encourage you to also think about it in terms of when you walk into a high school and you're talking to 1 student versus 5 students versus 50 students, you're going to present differently. I think you do not always need to be prepared for the lowest tech possible. No video, no PowerPoint, just you talking, maybe you having to be on your cell phone. But I think it's another good way to think about it. Maybe you want to be high tech, but is that going to be an effective way to communicate if you're only talking to 1 student? Related to that, again, those just in case situations. We're used to like sharing, like, okay, I've got the high school's phone number. What is that? Is that the main front desk, or is that the cell phone or the office phone of the admission or the college counselor? Those things are important. When I couldn't get the sound to work, thank you very much. One of the attendees today sent me a text going, hey, you do this. It's like, I'll remember that for next time. So, but it's a great example of like, now in a different situation, this person and he'd been the high school counselor and I had been this, we could have solved that problem really quickly. As it turned out, it's like, it's fine. It's a minute video and we're just kind of moving along. But I think that direct contact information is really important, because in one of my situations, I think had to try 3 different platforms before we got it to work. So, and we're putting inquiry cards out here. I don't know how they're going to work. There's some options. I don't think we have time for discussion in it, but I think that is one of the things, if people have ideas in our discussions, that I hope you guys will talk about. Of course, I have ideas as well, but I think it is one of the bigger conundrums for us to think through that will be a little bit more hit and miss.
Right, and we added it in part because in our pilot project, I asked the colleges to send materials ahead of time, and that included inquiry cards, and then the high school counselor sent those back to the college. I would suggest that that's probably not best practice in the current environment. And so it's just one of those things that was a part of what we did, and we wanted to toss out to you all to really think about what is going to be the best way for you to get information from students. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Here are the online platforms. We're just throwing them out there. I think the top 2 are the biggest ones. I would point out, it's important to note, there are some high schools that we have heard of that will not allow certain hosting or certain platforms. And so colleges, I think we need to, again, really respect what those high schools are asking of us in terms of our platform. We are still their guest. And just as when we walk into their high school and maybe have to wear a lovely bright yellow sticker, or we have to have a parking pass or what have you, we need to similarly respect what platform they're asking us to use in the system. There was a question in terms of PowerPoint and effectiveness. I am a WebEx school. I was the low end of the totem pole. I am the only non-Zoom school of our 4 folks in today. But WebEx, I know, does have the ability to optimize sound or optimize video. It is still not perfect, but it is very doable. So, and then consider this a normal visit. Again, be prepared for anything. You never know what you're going to walk into when you walk into a high school, and be prepared for those. Being on time, we still need to show up. And we all know, again, technology can go a little awry, but it's really hard when, especially if a student is sitting there solo in front of their computer screen and you're not there yet. While we have no longer driving times or traffic to worry about, I think still be mindful that you're going to have to transition as a college person from one to the next. And similarly, as a high school, you need to transition from one college visit to the next. And different from me as a college person walking in and going, oh, so-and-so is still here. I can wait a second. I don't know that that's happening. So again, scheduling, I think it's back to that scheduling question, but being present on time. And then Adrienne?
Yeah, so I think I want to just a reminder that this is really all about the student. And so everyone should be student-centered in how we make this happen. And that is true both on the high school and the college side, that thinking about what do students need during this time. And I would put in a plug for also just sort of thinking about the realities of being in the midst of a pandemic. It may not need to be a 40-minute visit. And you know, some schools obviously don't have 40-minute visits, some have 20, and that's the flexibility that everybody is used to, that we might have different times, but really sort of thinking about, it may be that a virtual visit doesn't need to be as long as an in-person visit feels like it is needing to be at times, and just really thinking about what is it that students need in this moment, and what is going to help them get the information that they need and the relationship building that they need in order to make good decisions as they move forward. And so being student-centered, that's always true. I think it's especially true of something that we should be aware of as we're thinking about virtual visits. And then we just wanted to have a really quick reminder around thinking about this as a normal visit. And so whether you're working from home or not, whether students are actually in the school building or they're at home, just a reminder about the fact that folks are meeting people. So colleges are doing their work, and so dressing appropriately is important. Thinking about your background is important when you're meeting students, but also for students to be thinking about that as well. They're going to be meeting people who may in fact be reading their application, and so how do they want to present themselves? Not that they need to dress up, but that they want to be thinking about how they're presenting themselves in the same way that they might as if they were in your school building. And so to be thinking specifically, or especially for those students who maybe haven't walked into the building and are meeting folks from home, what kind of instruction and guidance can we give to students to make this a particularly good experience for them as well. And yeah, being realistic, so sort of thinking about your time and working especially hard to do things like avoiding burnout on both sides of the desk. It may not make sense. Even if you could do 8 visits in a day, do you want to do 8 visits in a day, or does it make more sense to keep those to the 4 or 5 that you would maybe normally have, both for your students and for the college side coming around?
Yeah, and one of my phrases I always say is more is not always better, more is just sometimes more. So again, back to my original call to action of colleges, find some additional schools to visit. I didn't say 50. And if you can decide you can only do 1, that's 1 more than you did last year. So more is not always better, more is sometimes just more, and being mindful of all of our time and mindful of students' time as well. We need to be really conscious that we're all tired and we're all struggling, and we're going to be in a very different situation this spring, or this fall. I know there's a number of questions coming in, and my colleague Stephanie is helping us out with that. But we're also hoping to transition into some discussion times. So this is the time where we're going to be a little bit tricky, and this was our pivot that we had to do this morning. But there are close to 300 of you here listening today. Hopefully we didn't leave you all awry. We know there were some unanswered questions, and we really designed this, quite honestly, to be more of a presentation that is more of a discussion, excuse me. So we're going to move you into smaller Zoom rooms by alphabet, your last name. If you have that original email that you received, you'll have that information there. My colleagues are exiting because they are hosting the 3 rooms. I'll be joining one as well. And then in those rooms, we're hoping to break you down in even smaller groups of about 6 to 8 people. As Adrienne mentioned, I think she mentioned, it was her that mentioned it, this session is pretty dominated by colleges. Unfortunately, we were hoping that it would be more of a mix. And so you may be in a room just of other college folks. Hopefully that still allows some good conversation. Those of you that are high school folks, though, I hope you'll really speak up and let us know what we have. In each group, we're hoping you'll have a note taker. We're going to send out this form in the new sessions or in the breakout rooms, and there's a place for you to type everything in there, so no one is having to type things more than once, but we do ask for in each of those small groups for a note taker, and then we're going to share those notes as we progress, and hopefully by the end of next week, or excuse me, the end of this week.